For more than 60 years, Dolly Parton seemed unstoppable. Over 3,000 songs. More than 100 million records sold. Millions of children receiving free books through her literacy programs. She built an empire from nothing and somehow kept smiling through all of it. But in 2026, something changed. After quietly battling serious health complications, Dolly canceled her Las Vegas residency. She admitted her medications were leaving her dizzy, her immune and digestive systems were struggling, and emotionally, she was still carrying the devastating loss of her husband, Carl Dean, who passed away in 2025 after nearly 6 decades of marriage. Then she said something that stopped fans cold. She compared herself to an old classic car sitting in the repair shop, and after joking about needing new shocks, pistons, and an engine rebuild, she added softly, "I cannot lose my spark." And suddenly, people around the world saw something they had almost forgotten. Even legends get tired. Even the strongest people eventually reach a moment where the body demands a price for decades of non-stop giving. But how did Dolly Parton get here? And what happens when the woman who spent a lifetime comforting everyone else finally needs someone to help carry her? To understand this moment, you have to go back to the beginning. Dolly Rebecca Parton was born in 1946 inside a tiny one-room cabin in rural Tennessee. No electricity. No running water. 12 children crowded together under one roof. Her father could not read or write, and the family was so poor that the doctor who delivered her was reportedly paid with a sack of cornmeal. Most people born into that kind of hardship never leave it behind. But Dolly had something unusual very early in life, a voice people could not ignore. By the age of 7, she was singing in church. By 10, she was appearing on local television. And at 18, one day after graduating high school, she boarded a bus to Nashville with almost nothing except ambition. Now think about that for a moment. How many people are willing to risk everything with no guarantee it will work? And how many actually survive the pressure once success arrives? On her very first day in Nashville, Dolly walked into a laundromat and met a quiet young man named Carl Dean. While she would become one of the most recognizable women on earth, Carl wanted almost nothing to do with fame. He avoided cameras, skipped public events, and stayed far away from Hollywood attention. That balance became the foundation of Dolly's life. She built the public empire. Carl protected the private world waiting for her at home. They married in 1966 and stayed together for nearly 60 years. In an industry famous for broken relationships, scandals, and temporary romances, their marriage became almost mythical. Dolly often joked publicly about their differences, but behind the humor was something very real. Carl Dean gave her stability. He loved the woman beneath the wigs, rhinestones, and larger-than-life image. And when he died in March 2025 at the age of 82, something inside Dolly Parton changed. Not immediately. At first, she kept moving forward the way she always had. Work. Interviews. Projects. Smiles. But grief has a way of catching up quietly. Sometimes the heart breaks first. Sometimes the body follows later. Within months, health problems began stacking on top of each other. Kidney stone complications worsened. Her immune system weakened. Her digestive health became unstable. Doctors reportedly advised her to slow down, something Dolly has almost never done in her entire adult life. Have you ever noticed how some people seem strong for everyone else until one day their body simply says, "Enough"? That appeared to be happening to Dolly. In late 2025, she postponed several major appearances, including her planned Las Vegas residency. Fans immediately sensed something was wrong because for decades Dolly had rarely stopped working. Even during difficult periods in her life, she kept performing. Then rumors exploded online after one of her sisters posted a message saying she had been praying all night for Dolly's health. Suddenly, speculation spread everywhere. Was it serious? Was she hiding something? Dolly responded the way only Dolly Parton could. In a video message, she smiled at the camera and joked, "I ain't dead yet." Fans laughed with relief, but behind the humor was a woman clearly trying to reassure people while also protecting her privacy. Still, her public appearances became increasingly rare. She missed important events connected to Dollywood and stepped away from performing altogether. And for someone who had practically lived on stage since childhood, the silence felt enormous. Then came March 2026, and Dolly finally stopped hiding how deeply she had been struggling. During the opening ceremony for a new Dollywood season, she spoke openly about grief for the first time. Not as a celebrity delivering a polished statement, but as an 80-year-old widow trying to explain what losing her husband had done to her emotionally and physically. She admitted she felt worn down, exhausted, drained in ways she never expected. And suddenly, the woman who had spent decades appearing larger than life sounded painfully human. Do you believe grief can actually make someone physically sick? Many doctors now say absolutely yes. Stress hormones rise. Sleep disappears. The immune system weakens. The body begins fighting battles it normally could handle. For Dolly, the timing felt almost too cruel to comprehend. One devastating loss had barely settled into reality before her body itself began turning against her. First came the exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed capable of fixing. Then came the dizziness, the digestive complications, the immune problems, the weakness that quietly followed her from room to room like an unwanted shadow. Day by day, the strain grew heavier. And yet, somehow, Dolly Parton still found ways to smile through it. Even while speaking openly about her pain, she continued making jokes for audiences because that was what she had spent her entire life doing. Turning discomfort into laughter. Turning heartbreak into warmth. Turning suffering into songs people could survive alongside. During one appearance, she joked that she had no interest in finding another husband because Carl Dean would never approve if she arrived at heaven's gates with another man hanging onto her arm. The audience burst into laughter, but underneath the humor was something impossible to miss. There was grief in her voice. Not theatrical grief. Not celebrity sadness crafted for headlines. Real grief. The kind that lingers quietly beneath every sentence no matter how hard someone tries to hide it. For many fans, that moment changed everything. People no longer saw only the glittering superstar standing under stage lights wearing rhinestones and impossible wigs. They saw a woman carrying unbearable loneliness while still trying to protect everyone else from seeing how much she hurt. And perhaps that was what made the story resonate so deeply across the internet. Because who has not done the same thing at some point? Who has not laughed in public while quietly breaking in private? Who has not pretended to be stronger than they actually felt simply because other people depended on them to keep smiling? Then came the Instagram video in May 2026 that truly stunned millions. The video itself was simple. No dramatic music. No glamorous production. Just Dolly speaking honestly to the camera in the familiar warm tone people had trusted for decades. But the simplicity of the message made it even more powerful. She explained that her treatments and medications were helping her recover, but they were also creating new challenges. The dizziness had become difficult to manage. Sometimes she felt swimmy-headed, as she called it with her usual humor. Walking across a stage in towering heels while balancing elaborate outfits and heavy instruments was no longer safe. That was why the Las Vegas residency had to be cancelled. Fans were disappointed, of course, but most people immediately understood. At 80 years old, after decades of non-stop work, Dolly had finally reached a moment where even she could not simply push through anymore. But it was what she said next that people could not stop replaying online. With a soft laugh, Dolly compared herself to an old classic car sitting in a repair garage. She joked that her doctors had lifted the hood and discovered far more repairs were needed than anyone originally expected. The engine needed rebuilding. The transmission was slipping. The shocks and pistons were wearing out. The metaphor sounded funny at first. Fans laughed because Dolly had always possessed a rare ability to make even frightening situations sound comforting. Then she paused. Her smile softened. And quietly, almost like she was speaking more to herself than the audience, she said, "I cannot lose my spark." That single sentence spread everywhere within hours. Why did it hit people so hard? Perhaps because those 7 words captured something universal that had very little to do with celebrity culture. Everyone fears losing their spark. Not just performers. Ordinary people too. Parents. Workers. Caregivers. Dreamers. The fear that exhaustion, grief, aging, illness, or disappointment might someday dim the part of us that once felt alive. And if someone as endlessly energetic as Dolly Parton feared that possibility, then suddenly the conversation became personal for millions of people watching. Because Dolly had always seemed unstoppable. She grew up in extreme poverty in the mountains of Tennessee, one of 12 children living in a tiny cabin without electricity or indoor plumbing. Many people facing those beginnings would have accepted limitation as unavoidable. Dolly did the opposite. She transformed herself into one of the most recognizable entertainers in modern history. But her journey was never simply about fame. She built businesses. She created theme parks. She acted in movies. She wrote books. She composed songs that crossed generations and genres. Through her literacy foundation, she donated more than 200 million books to children around the world, helping families who otherwise could not afford them. Entire communities benefited from her generosity after disasters and economic hardship. How many celebrities truly continue giving at that level for decades? And perhaps the more fascinating question is this: what does it cost a person to spend 60 years constantly pouring energy into the world? Because people saw the sparkle. They saw the performances, the interviews, the laughter, the glamorous persona carefully polished over time. But very few people saw the exhaustion behind it. Very few people saw the emotional cost of always being on. That was where Carl Dean entered the story in a way the public never fully understood until after his death. Carl had famously avoided the spotlight for nearly their entire marriage. While Dolly became one of the most famous women on earth, Carl stayed private. He rarely appeared publicly. He avoided Hollywood culture. He remained grounded in ordinary routines while his wife became a global icon. For years, people joked about how mysterious he seemed. Some even questioned whether he existed because he appeared so rarely beside her. But maybe that privacy was exactly why their relationship survived for nearly 60 years. Carl gave Dolly something fame could never provide, a place where she no longer had to perform. Imagine spending decades surrounded by cameras, interviews, expectations, and constant public attention. Imagine millions of strangers believing they know you while very few people actually do. Would you not crave one person who simply allowed you to be human? According to people close to them, Carl was that safe place. Behind the scenes, away from audiences and flashing lights, he reminded Dolly who she was before the fame consumed everything. He protected the quiet parts of her life. He anchored her to reality while the world constantly demanded more from her. So when he died, she did not simply lose a husband. She lost the one place where she could fully rest. And losses like that change people forever. Especially after nearly 6 decades together. Grief after that kind of love does not disappear quickly. In many ways, it reshapes a person entirely. Suddenly the routines feel different. The silence inside the house feels louder. Even success loses some of its meaning because the one person who shared the journey is gone. Yet despite all of this, Dolly still refused to stop creating. That may actually be the most astonishing part of her story. While recovering physically and emotionally, she continued working on a Broadway musical based on her life. She stayed involved in plans for a Nashville museum and hotel project. She kept recording music from home. Friends close to her revealed that she still woke up during the middle of the night whenever melodies entered her mind because she feared losing the inspiration before morning. Most people would have stepped away completely under those circumstances. Dolly kept building anyway. But should she have? That question has quietly divided public opinion. Some people admire her relentless determination. They see her continued creativity as proof of resilience and passion. Others worry that the same ambition responsible for her success may also be slowly exhausting her beyond recovery. Can a person spend their entire life pushing forward without eventually paying a price for it? Modern culture often glorifies non-stop productivity. People are praised for working endlessly, sacrificing sleep, ignoring stress, and continuing forward no matter the personal consequences. Rest is frequently treated like weakness instead of necessity. Dolly Parton became one of the greatest success stories in entertainment partly because she embraced that relentless drive. But now, at this stage of her life, her struggle raises uncomfortable questions people rarely want to confront. What happens when the strongest person in the room finally becomes tired? What happens when someone who spent decades comforting everyone else suddenly needs comfort themselves? And why do so many people feel ashamed admitting they need rest? Perhaps that is why audiences responded so emotionally to Dolly's honesty in 2026. In a world obsessed with perfection, filters, and carefully managed public images, She chose vulnerability instead. She admitted she was exhausted. She admitted her body needed repair. She admitted she could not do everything anymore. That kind of honesty requires enormous courage, especially for someone whose career was built partly on appearing endlessly energetic and optimistic. And strangely, that vulnerability may have strengthened her connection with fans more than any performance ever could. Because people recognized themselves in her struggle. Older fans saw reflections of their own aging bodies and health battles. Widows and widowers understood the loneliness hiding beneath her jokes. Caregivers recognized the burnout that comes from spending years taking care of others while neglecting themselves. Even younger audiences connected with the pressure of constantly feeling expected to remain productive no matter how emotionally drained they became. Dolly's story stopped feeling like celebrity news. It became something much more human. One reason the Instagram video spread so rapidly online was because it arrived during a time when millions of people already felt emotionally exhausted themselves. Economic stress, personal struggles, family pressures, and social expectations had left many people quietly overwhelmed. Hearing someone as iconic as Dolly Parton openly say she needed rest gave others permission to acknowledge their own exhaustion too. And perhaps that was her greatest gift in this chapter of her life. Not inspiration through perfection. Inspiration through honesty. The truth is, Dolly Parton is not disappearing. She is not surrendering. If anything, she is redefining what resilience actually looks like. For years, society treated resilience as the ability to keep going endlessly without breaking. But real resilience may be something entirely different. Maybe resilience is allowing yourself to rebuild after life breaks you anyway. Maybe resilience means admitting limitations before they destroy you completely. Maybe resilience means understanding that slowing down is not failure. Dolly seems to understand that now more than ever. Even while grieving, dizzy from medication, and navigating physical recovery, she still talks about future plans. Future music. Future dreams. She still speaks with curiosity about what else she wants to create before her story ends. The spark is still there. Perhaps dimmer some days. Perhaps flickering beneath layers of grief and exhaustion. But undeniably alive. And maybe that is what people find most emotional about watching her right now. Not the sadness. Not even the health concerns. It is the determination. After everything life has taken from her, Dolly Parton still wants to create beauty. She still wants to make people laugh. She still wants to write songs in the middle of the night when inspiration suddenly arrives. That kind of spirit cannot easily be destroyed. But her story also leaves audiences with one final uncomfortable question. Why do so many of us believe we must completely collapse before allowing ourselves to rest? Why do people wait until their bodies fail, relationships crack, or mental exhaustion becomes unbearable before admitting they need help? Dolly spent decades giving the world permission to dream bigger. Now, perhaps unintentionally, she is giving people permission to slow down without shame too. And maybe that lesson matters just as much as the music. Because even legends are human. Even the brightest lights eventually require restoration. Even the strongest engines need repair after carrying heavy loads for too long. Dolly Parton spent 60 years helping millions of people survive heartbreak, loneliness, poverty, disappointment, and grief through her music and kindness. Now the world is watching her navigate those same struggles herself in real time. There is something profoundly moving about that. Not because people enjoy seeing icons suffer, but because vulnerability reminds us that nobody escapes the realities of being human. Fame does not protect people from aging. Success does not erase loneliness. Money cannot fully shield someone from grief. And yet, despite all of that, Dolly continues moving forward with humor, grace, and honesty. Perhaps that is why the world remains so emotionally attached to her story. Not because she appears invincible, but because she does not. She looks tired sometimes, heartbroken sometimes, fragile sometimes, and still, somehow, hopeful. In the end, maybe that is the true meaning behind the sentence that shook millions of people. I cannot lose my spark. Because the spark Dolly Parton fears losing is not fame, beauty, or even success. It is hope. And as long as that hope survives, perhaps there are still many chapters left in her story yet to be written.